words, you want words and writing on air.
Writing on Air from East Leeds FM.
Regional competition.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Clare Wigzell, and I'm a Leeds-based poet. And these are my poems about Barbara Hepworth, entitled I Am the Landscape. Now, I have a slideshow, so for those that are listening, I'm going to be explaining what the slide looks like, and those who are able to see have got plenty of time to look at it. I've got a nice visual. So excuse me, those who are here or who are at home being able to look at the slides for my explanations. What I feel is it'll give you a few minutes to have your own reaction to them. One of the reasons I write about Barbara Hepworth is because I have an immensely strong reaction to her sculptures. And I hope that some of my poems, if they can do anything for you, they might help you to feel that you can have a strong reaction to any Hepworth sculptures. And there are many all round Leeds. So I hope, if nothing else from today, you might be able to go away, find a sculpture, think about some of the things that have happened here, and see if that helps you to have your own reaction. I'm not an expert. This isn't the life and times of Barbara Hepworth. This is very much my poetic or creative response. And it's both to her sculptures and to some of her amazing writing, because I think she's an incredibly articulate artist. And this all came about because I share two landscapes with her, West Yorkshire and West Penwith, which is down in Cornwall. And I was down at the gallery at St Ives Tate, and I was looking on the wall, and there it said, I am the landscape. And it was one of those visceral moments when, because I'm writing a lot, I write a lot about nature, I felt really affected. I thought, yes, I know what she means. I am the landscape. And I'm standing in the midst of her sculptures that are all like landscape to me. So that's why I started writing about her. So the first slide is Brimham Rocks. We have a big, tall stack of rocks one side, a few the other, and a single tree, which is black against the sky. This is called ekphrastic poetry, which is poetry written in response to art. Next slide, please. And here is a wonderful photograph of Barbara Hepworth. She's got her headscarf on, and she's got a bit of shadow, and there's a lovely curved sculpture there, and she's got an implement in her hand, and she's either working or she's thinking about doing some work on it. What she says about her hands: my left hand is my thinking hand. The right is only a motor hand. This holds the hammer. The left hand, the thinking hand, must be relaxed, sensitive. The rhythms of thought pass through the fingers and grip of this hand into the stone. It is also a listening hand. It listens for basic weaknesses of flaws in the stone, for the possibility or imminence of fractures. And I'm now going to read the first poem in my collection called I Am the Landscape. Well, it's a little pamphlet. Stone sculpture. She senses me within. Her left hand fingers the crevices, the slightest cracks. Her hammer hand cuts away chunks. I tremble as she chips and shaves exposing my biggest curve. She knows my density, the molten core, the millennia of weight that crushed me. Her eyes, bright with reflected light, spy my inner folds, the undersides of crags and dales. She stalks me, her hamstrings stretch, slivers of stone fly as she follows the lines of my integrity. I lean into her, daring her to scour and pound me into being. Thank you. Next slide, please. This is a photograph of my favourite beach in the world, and it's Rinsey Beach in Cornwall. But if you are listening to this, you can picture any beach you know that has cliffs, has rocks, and has sand. And this one is called I Am the Landscape, this poem. And what Hepworth says is, you can't make a sculpture without involving your body. You move and you feel and you breathe and you touch. The spectator is the same. His or her body is involved too. This poem is called I Am the Landscape. Sea creeps up the shifting slope, circling and sucking at her ankles, tugging under. It frees her from gravity, sets her sail until she becomes sinew and undulating muscle, curling, weaving, gliding. A strong wave bends her torso, pulling her spine over and over, punching out air, flopping her onto wet sand. Flattened and shuddering, she sucks in rasps of air. Her head tilts, hidden by seaweed hair, her arms stiffen as they lift backbone. Her hips flex to take the weight. With each step, she sinks her plinth feet, staggering to the cliff, her eyes drawn to naked rocks against the sky. Thank you. Next slide, please. Here is a picture of Hepworth's studio down in Cornwall. I don't know if any of you have been, but I do recommend that you do go if you ever go to St Ives. And it's in the centre of St Ives, packed with people. Suddenly you can go in and there's a walled garden. And her studio opens onto the walled garden. And she died in a fire in the 70s. And what she always smoked. Barbara Hepworth was a great smoker, and at night she'd smoke her last cigarette. She didn't sleep well towards the end. Her health wasn't good. So what she did is have her sleeping tablet and then have the last cigarette. And then one night she didn't get the order. She got the order right, but she must have fallen asleep, and she burnt herself. So she burnt to death at the end. But what they've done is leave the studio as she left it. So you can see it's got her overalls still hanging on the side. It's got lumps of sculpture half done already and all her implements. And there's something so incredibly moving to see this studio left as it was all that time. Next slide, please. And this one is her garden that the studio looks out on, which is absolutely beautiful. And it's full of lovely plants that are very structural. And then she's got all her, as many as they can, sculptures in the garden. They've got some enormous sculptures. And you can get a peep through the sculpture into some bits of the garden with lots of views. Another slide, please. Now, this one is called Stringed Figure, brackets, curlew. So this is a sculpture, and it's a circular sculpture with a big hole in it and a big round with string stretched across it. And string was one of the things that Hepworth was famous for using. And what she says about it is, the strings were the tension I felt between myself and the sea, the wind, or the hills. If you look at her string sculptures, I think you see sinew and muscle, and you see the tension because they're pierced. The whatever stone or material, wood, whatever she's made it from, it's pierced, and then the string is put through it and pulled tightly and attached. And there's something about that, and the way the light catches it, and the relationship of the thin lines together, where it sort of creates matter but not matter, I think is rather wonderful. And the poem that goes with these slides is called The Song of the Sea. White morning. Tide has washed the sky. Through my studio's open door, a gull's guttural call. Brine blown in from wave spray. My fingers glide over the wood's concavity, chiseled, scraped, and smoothed. It is a sea cave with curved shoulders of black rock, shadowed as though underwater, washed by dappled sound, waves rushing the pebbled beach. Having anchored the string, I pull it up through holes, stretching it tight between hollow and tip, crossing the wide mouth, where it twangs as it glints in the stinging wind. And of course, string makes you think of music and stringed instruments, and she was very keen on music, which we'll come to. Thank you. Next slide, please. This slide is two large oval sort of shapes, squarey ovals, and they have holes cut in them and bits cut out of them. And the most important thing is they're next to each other, nearly, slightly overlapping, but very close together. She says that touch, which we've mentioned already, was a very important thing to her. Sculpture communicates an immediate sense of life. You can feel the pulse of it. It is perceived above all by the sense of touch, which is our earliest sensation. And touch gives us a sense of living contact and security. The sculpture is called dual form. They lie on their sides, limbs close, skin breathing onto skin, flesh and muscle squeezing over bone, hands stroking uplands, hillocks, slopes. A stream between them trips and hiccups, sweetening the gorge with effervescence. From high above, wind starts to moan, flattening grasses as it swoops down. Sunshine bakes earth and roots, releases milk scent of baby's lips. Far below, the beck rides to drop, falling, falling, and thinning with air, dashing onto black juts of rock, cooled magma from the inner core. Next slide, please. This is a picture of a pack horse bridge near Haworth. And you can imagine the pack horses carrying bales of woolen cloth, and they had to make their way, and there would be lots and lots of small rivers and tributaries of rivers that they had to pass over on their paths, and they were all done with pack horse bridges. And I was walking a pack horse bridge when I was starting this work, and there was something about the shape of it and the fact that it's, stone on stone, and it has a function that somehow made me think of Barbara Hepworth. What she says is, she was very into landscape, as we've said, and her father was a surveyor, and she used to go round with him. And this is what she says: "All my early memories are of forms and shapes and textures. Moving through and over the West Riding landscape with my father in his car, the hills were sculptures. The roads defined the form. Above all, there was a sensation of moving physically over the contours of fullnesses and concavities, through hollows and over peaks, feeling, touching through mind and hand and eye." The next poem is called Barbara Hepworth Walks the Packhorse Bridge. Her fingers follow the contours of my parapets, the blunted edges, the softened fissures. She hears my inner rhythms, my loud and quieter notes, the creaking as my blocks knock in the tension of my arch. Her feet curve as they grip my narrow floor, bone and flesh reading the angles. They clock how hoofs and clogged feet, burdened with bales of woven cloth, have chipped, hammered, and smoothed. Her muscles contract, her sinews stretch, her knee joints hinge. She senses the infinitesimal impact as her weight lands with each step, the resistance of my dense material. Below, on my dark concavity, popples of radiant light play as wires of wind slice water, unspooling from the river Worth. Thank you. Next slide, please. This is a slide with blue sky and cloud, and a big open aspect with a hill in the distance, a slope, and on it is Treburic standing stone. And we can see a big face, a plane of the stone with lichen and dark markings, and then in shadow behind it, and it's got rough edges. Barbara Hepworth was very interested in the standing stone, in the individual, the human in the landscape. On the lonely hills, a human figure has the vitality and the poignancy of all people's struggles in this universe. This poem is called Single Form. The tall, thick stone squats in my studio, substantial, immovable. I sense its presence. The sun illuminates one side, casting a moving shadow across the floor. I see a monolith at an angle to the fell, dark against the sky. It is wedged hard into the earth against the brunt of winter, its bones stiff and cold. I shiver as snow, hail, slanted rain lay the bracken low, wither the heather, decay the soggy grass in the miles of peat bog. Frost and ice shatter the stone's surface. A tree, bent by the battering, sinks its heels deeper in rocky ground. Like a mill girl moving against the wind, with her shawl wrapped round her head and body, feet stumbling, shoulders curled in. For weeks I labour to carve this. My knuckles are raw and bleeding, my finger joints ache, my skin is brittle with dust. At last, exposed, I place it outside, alone, facing the sea. Thank you. Next slide, please. This is a bronze sculpture, and it's a big curved U with a sort of hollowed out bit at the bottom with a hole, and the sides of it twist slightly different ways. And Hepworth carved this, and Trafalgar is a cliff. So it was what she saw. It's the view between two sides of the cliff with the sea beyond. I saw this in the entrance to Tate St. Ives. And when I saw it, I felt it in my body. I felt somehow, I could imagine my arms were up, twisted, that my body was down, my arms were twisted up behind me, and I could feel the twist and the strength of that position. Hepworth says, I rarely draw what I see, I draw what I feel in my body. This poem is in 3 parts. Each is slightly different. They're slightly different reactions to the same sculpture. One. Where the cliff divides, rocks twist as they hold back the earth. 2 torsos dig their heels into water, flex their muscles as dying sunlight ripples down their skin. As the orange ball lowers into the horizon, the sea shudders, amber rises, then falls in hot breaths. 2. Icarus, made from ancient cooled rock, crouches. His great black wings undulate in the breeze. They pulse with vibrant light. Alert, poised, he is ready to take flight up, up to the source of life. 3. Cliff's bones cradle an ovoid of wavering blue. It coruscates with dying light, the horizon dissolving. At the open apex, air floods in, then overflows into the thinning, spinning indigo sky. Thank you. Next slide, please. This sculpture is called Seaform, and it's a bronze, and it's a little bit like a bowl shape with the edges curled over with large holes in it. And when I saw it, I could immediately sense, down on Rinsey Beach that I showed you a picture of, there's a part where the shape of the bay means that two bits of current come together and they come at you from either side and they don't quite resolve. And I was thinking about that and what it feels like to be in that sea with those different waves coming at you and you're not quite sure which is going to break over you or which is going to come up to your mouth. It reminded me of music, and I imagined that sense when you've got two bits of music coming together that don't quite resolve, or they're left both being there, somehow fighting against each other, and maybe then usually get resolved. Because Hepworth is also into music, it just seemed the right metaphor to use. So this one is also in two parts, two very different. So this is the first one, Seaform. It's called Porthmere, by the way, in brackets. That's because Porthmere is the beach, which is just below the St Ives Gallery. So it's sea. This is her sculpture of the sea. Riding a choppy tide of noise, diagonal waves race across the scale. Smacking into each other, they leap, rising with such force their top notes tip. Contrapunctal swirls in close harmony, their chords never resolving. Till, smashed together by a huge breaker, they are rushed up the gritted beach, where, reaching the coda, they are ripped into holes and sucked back into the hole. Seaform 2 is because I was looking at this and my first response was to feel it as the sea and the waves, which is amazing considering it's bronze. Such a solid thing. But my friend who I was looking at it with said to me, I think it looks like a girdle. Well, there's another poem then. So here's number 2. Here in my watery girdle you glide, a silent seahorse on a cord, holding your secrets. Through gossamer eyelids you glimpse mottled light. I will float you up in your basket, where you gurgle as wind lifts your hair, sea spray softening your peachy cheeks. I will rise you gently up and over the next wave, swirling my currents beneath you, keeping you buoyant, rocking you to sleep. Next slide, please. Hepworth was a mother. She had a son when she was young with John Skeeping, and she then, with Ben Nicholson, had another baby, and when they came out, there were 3. And there was a time when there weren't scans, so she didn't know she was having triplets and was in shock, as you can imagine. She's been quite criticised, I think, maybe unfairly, because she's an artist and she's trying to do her art, but she has 3 babies and an older son and 3 babies at one go. So she's all on just to cope. But what's amazing is that her sculptures have motherhood in them. And I don't think motherhood is very much represented yet in art, and not in great art, as it should be. And I think Hepworth's motherhood sculptures are incredibly moving. So this one is called Mother and Child. And it's quite a small one, and it's stone, and it's semi-abstract. So one shape sort of has a head and sort of has a torso and has a big lap. And then in it, made from the same stone, is a smaller baby-type shape with just a head and little bumps for arms. and it's just sitting within her lap, or standing maybe. This poem is Mother and Child. Deep within me you grow. My spine curves round you. Muscle, cartilage, fat are padding. My haunches thicken, preparing for the weight of you. My heart keeps its rhythm steady, steady against my ribs. Yours a quicker beat beneath. Sensing you are ready, I lean in, mallet in hand. I hammer, sweat and pant, the waves of my muscle pushing you out into the light. Now, upright, you cradle in my lap. Your flesh pulls away, then falls back into mine. Next slide, please. This next sculpture is called Hollow Form and Inner Form. And actually they were done at different times. So the outer one was a big log that she and the people who were working with her, because artists have a lot of people working with them, and they dragged it in from the woods and they scoured out all the rot from the inside of it. That was somebody's job. So they chiseled it all out and ended up with this rock, with this log, with this amazing shape. So that is the outer hollow one. And then the inner one is a very thin, very smooth, solid metal with a couple of holes in it. When I saw this in the entrance to the Hepworth Museum in Wakefield, and I do recommend everybody goes to the Hepworth Museum in Wakefield, and the recent the exhibition there at the moment about her life and art is an absolutely fantastic exhibition and well worth it. So what was I saying about that? I know, I went in and there it was in the entrance. And at the time, I was really struggling because my youngest son was struggling with his mental health and I was struggling with being his mother and not sure I was doing a good job. And I looked at this sculpture and it seemed to completely say to me what was happening to me. So, this poem is a personification of motherhood for me. Maybe say, not for me always, for that moment for me. You crept up slowly, took hold, ripped me from the ground, dragged me from the steaming green, cut me into chunks. You hollowed me out until my edges were thin, chiseling marks inside my skin. Recreating me in plaster, you cast me in bronze. Now, day and night, I curve my awkward bones round my little one. Next slide, please. Barbara's eldest son died when he was 23 in an aeroplane crash, which was a terrible tragedy that you can imagine for her. She was absolutely devastated. She was also into Christian Science. And I've been learning a little bit about it because I went to the amazing Ilkley Literature Festival talk by Eleanor Clayton yesterday on her new book, which she's the curator in Wakefield. And she was talking about Christian Science. And there's a few things she said I thought were really... She said it was very popular amongst middle-class people in the 20s and 30s. And there was a new Christian Science church being built every 4 days. So I sort of thought, wow, so it was a big thing, which I sort of hadn't understood. But there's a few things she said about it that I thought were really interesting. One was that Barbara Hepworth felt that figurative, so representation of something looking like it does in your sculpture, corresponded to the Christian Science idea of the reality mind. And abstraction corresponded to the divine mind. So I thought that was a very interesting difference. So she was religious, and I think when her son died, as you can imagine maybe, she went back to her religion. I don't know all the details of it. I just know that she chose to make this beautiful sculpture and put it in the church in St. Ives. So to describe it, it's the Madonna and Child. It's in white alabaster or something beautiful. It's quite figurative, isn't it? It looks like a Madonna and Child. And the Madonna is looking away, and the child is looking up at the Madonna's face. I've been told that that is the pose for the Virgin of Tenderness, Elusa, which is the title of the poem. The Madonna has died. This lump of mottled stone, Bianca del Mare, is my grief. I cannot see for wetness, but my hands know their way, shaping features, cutting sadness into her eyes, the babe's chunky flesh, the smooth, domed head. He is staring and staring, trying to reach me. I feel the warmth of his breath on my lips, the trusting weight of his clinging body, the brush of his cheek, his satin skin. Oh, my lady, love at the root of life has been torn away, carved for all mothers forever upon your quiet face. Thank you. Next slide, please. This sculpture is very different. This is a sculpture made from steel rods that have been bent. It's a photograph I took in her garden. It's not a brilliant photograph, but it's what I could get hold of and use. And actually, it's something she created for the theatre production of Electra at the Old Vic in London. So she was doing theatre sets. And I learnt yesterday that she did this in order that the light, it was sort of up in the back of the set, so that all through the play, the different lights would cast different shadows of it in different positions, as though the god Apollo, which is what it's called, the god Apollo was looking down in different ways on different people at different times in the production. But actually, when I saw it in the garden, I didn't know what it was for. I just saw it. And I felt this is something very insubstantial. This is an outline when everything else in the garden is solid. And this really struck me, and I had just seen in the garden house there a letter, because what happened after her son died is that Ben Nicholson left her. So she suffered deep, deep grief when he left. And in this letter was to her vicar in 1969. And what she says to him is my deep love for Ben, who is now married again to someone else for 11 years, So are my deep feelings a sin? So that's what she's asking. So after 11 years, when he's gone off with someone else, she still feels it so deeply. And when I looked at this sculpture, I felt her grief. So that's what my poem is then about. Since he left, life has of what needs to come into being. I do not want to move forward. I shiver in the moment of breakup, the thud, the smashing open, the falling away. Each morning, it is a fresh tearing, leaving me splintered, jagged, rough cut. But I must work. My hand, released from my mind, writes hieroglyphs in the air. I pick up steel rods, bend and twist their lines until he begins to emerge. Apollo, Lord of light, set me free. Cast your outline upon the morning. Show me shape and movement again. Help me to invoke solidity. Thank you. Next slide. We're getting there, folks. This is a wonderful sculpture called River Form. And again, this was a long log that Hepworth sculpted. So one side has been completely cut out. It's all been cut into in a curve. The base has been curved out even more. And then there are three sort of circular cuts or circles cut into the back of the wood. And then it's been cast in bronze. And now it's in her garden. And because it's been cast in bronze, it collects water. And water reflects the things that are the sky and other things there. So this is a heavy bronze sculpture called River Form, which completely says to me, river. The chunk of tree trunk on its side fills the studio with pungent sweetness. As I run my hand along its ridges, sap rises within its dead tissue. From my mallet and chisel, a river begins to flow, the weight of her carving a long bowl, hollowing out banks, meandering through silt. Sanded and smoothed, the sheer sides run with sun's flashes, slips and glides, water on its way from mountain to sea, lifted in clouds to fall again. Tunnels at angles through the sides are arteries of air and light, feeder streams or channels of runoff, leaching and leaking, keeping the body in balance. Cast now in bronze, the base has a heavy presence in my garden. Beneath its beaten surface, there is substance, gravitas. In its curve, a rain pool forms, fragments of agapanthus, sky, shafts of gold, shadows, hint, flit, glister, tremble. Next slide, please. In her grief, a friend of hers took her to Greece, to the Greek islands. And when they got back, this same friend sent her a load of this beautiful gurrier wood. And it helped get her started again on her sculpture after all her grieving. So this is one that has, again, the music in it. That Hepworth, she listened to music every day, she danced, she read poetry. And I feel there is music in the different planes and the light play. It's a very big circular, almost like a big circular bowl with a heavy base. And again, there's a circle cut out that's hollowed through. And there's lots of different planes that seem to spiral. And it's called Configuration, Fira. This is the name of the sculpture. Only when I crack open the gurrier wood, freeing the fresh scent of cedar, Can I feel again the hot sun? It bakes my bones, refusing to let me hide in the dry well of my grief. I touch the brown surface, fascinated as pink flecks dance like warm light. I hear a run of violin notes circling upwards into air. My chisel tunnels into the trunk, turning and curving, following the rings as they shape a snail's shell. A deeper set of piano notes resonates, carving the roundness of a boulder, the heft of it upon a shore. An oboe's reedy voice cuts a tube at downward angle, makes round notes that widen, hide in shadow, collapse into ellipses, pause. The strings return, scraping and scouring, smoothing a new slope, revealing the tree's years in African heat, until, sanded to a fine edge, they hold a long, high trill of light, an intake of breath. The orchestra comes in quietly, each group of instruments finding their voice in a polyphony, crescendoing until the music glissades up and over polished plains, bringing the forest to life again. The last slide, please. This final slide is again at Brimham Rocks, but this time we have both slopes. So we have both sets of rocks either side, still with our little tree hanging on in there. Two more poems. Pierced form. She circles the marble form. The surface is expansive. She can see how it conceals the inside. The chisel is placed, hammer comes down. She leaves her mark on the skin. She chips away again and again, not to shape the outside, but to know the stone through to its core. She does not stop until there's a hollow. She follows it further and further in, feeling her way until a splinter of light appears as if from another time. The crack widens. The next blow ruptures it fully. A river of air flows through the tunnel. There is inside and outside sunshine and shadow. She widens the hole, smoothing and smoothing. Her arm fits within the mass of it. She has entered the stone. She is wearing it like a sleeve. It is the passage through which she squeezed her baby, opening her softened hips, knowing how it feels to be breached. And our last poem, everybody. Hepworth was also very interested in politics. So she felt you should be part of society. And during the Second World War, she believed that her interest in abstract art was in fact anti-fascist. Because, as we know, the Nazis didn't like modern art. They didn't like weird art. And she saw abstraction as a universal thing, as a human universal. The more abstract, the more it represented humans. She also saw abstract as freedom. So she felt that she wanted to be more of an activist, so she wrote a letter with other artists about nuclear disarmament. She helped to set up CND. She joined the Labour Party. And over time, she believed you should work with others. You should make small changes that would add up to bigger ones. So I leave you with the last poem, which is about Hepworth's politics, and it's called What Matters. After a long time, with persistent small movements, each one following the effects of the last, the shape becomes clearer. Large chunks fall away. Air is let into stone. Further in, planes flatten out, coil into hollows. There are new faces reflecting the sun. It is hard work. Why shouldn't it be? It takes a hammer, a good ear, and plenty of patience to let marble speak. Now it is done, light dances, discovering new places to bounce off and hide. Each day a new focus. Shadows reveal what was cut away. There is the imprint of what it once was. It is no longer just matter. It has been freed into the exciting, shifting spirals of what is the matter. Thank you very much, everybody.